Hi, everyone. I'm Marianne Leppa. I am one of the associate directors on the graduate student and postdoc team. Thank you for being here today for our interviewing workshop. It's part of our Career Foundation series that we are having this week and next week. We have a lot to cover in the next 30 minutes, and we will give some time at the end for some Q&A. But again, welcome. So just to give a brief overview of what is on our agenda, we will talk about why interviews are valued by employers, why it's an important part of the application process. How do you best prepare? So what are some tips for your interview preparation? What are the different types of interviews that you may have? And what are some of the common interview questions that you may be encountering? And then lastly, we'll talk about the Exponent platform and some additional resources that are available to you. So interviews come in many forms, but overall, it's an opportunity for you to have a professional conversation with the employer. They've already seen your resume. Perhaps they've also asked for a cover letter. And so this is the next step in the process. They want to get to know you better. They want to get to know if you are a good fit for the role, for the company. And keep this in mind that they already believe that you are qualified for the job. That's why they're asking you to interview with them. They want to know more about your background, more about your qualifications, and your interest in the position. It's also a way for them to further investigate the fit, right? So not only the fit for them from their perspective, are you going to be a good fit on the team, in the department, at the company, but also enables you to determine if this is a place that you foresee yourself being happy at and wanting to work there. So it's a fit not only from their perspective, but also your perspective as the applicant and candidate. And it's also very imperative and important to remember that honesty and integrity are paramount to the interviewing process. You want to make sure that you are always honest in your answers and maintaining your integrity. It is your professional reputation. So here's an overview of some of the skills and qualities and attributes that employers are seeking, right? So these are kind of broad skills, general skills, and most jobs in some shape or form do require these various areas of skills. So, for example, communication skills, collaboration and teamwork skills, to a certain extent, analytical skills. In some roles, they may be more quantitatively focused, right? There's also organizational skills, multitasking, managing multiple deadlines for projects. So those are kind of fundamental to many different positions and opportunities. There's also the importance of what are the qualities that they're seeking in a potential employee to join their organization, their company, their firm. And so you want to think about, are you motivated? What is your motivation? Do you take initiative, right, on a project, or do you wait to be asked, right? Do you have a strong work ethic? How do you handle flexibility? Are you able to show adaptability, flexibility in a lot of different situations? Are you able to receive feedback from others? And then lastly, going back to the importance of honesty and integrity, those are also very important characteristics and qualities that employers are seeking. So here are three main things that employers want to know as they are interviewing you. The first is, how will you contribute and how can you contribute to the organization as a whole? What can you do in terms of the team specifically that you will be on? And then also at large, the company, organization, and the employer. They also want to know, what is your interest in wanting to work for them? Not just because there's an opening at the job, that's not really an appropriate response, right? So what is your interest? What resonates with you in terms of this specific opportunity, in terms of the company as a whole, the organization as a whole. And then lastly, what are you going to be like as a coworker, right? So 99% of the jobs require some form of collaboration, teamwork, working with others. So who are you going to be as a coworker and as a colleague? So here are some tips and recommendations for how to best prepare for the interview. We kind of like to call this like the low-hanging fruit, right? So what are some of the easy ways that you can start your preparation? Well, first and foremost, review the job description, the job posting. I often will tell students when they come in to have their resume reviewed and their cover letters reviewed to save the job description outside of the link that it may be posted on LinkedIn or another website, because sometimes those get taken down. And then you need to refer back to the job description and posting for your preparation for if you're invited to interview. So always make sure that you can copy it into another document just in case that link is then removed. So reviewing the job description, understanding what are the expectations, the responsibilities, what are the job functions. You also want to make sure that you're reviewing the organization's website. So not only familiarize yourself with what the mission is and the vision are, but also their products, their services, if applicable, right? So it all depends on the type of organization and the type of company that you're applying to. Now, what can be a little bit more in depth and a little bit more challenging does require some due diligence on your part, right? The first is we often recommend that you research about the company, right? So think about what are some articles that you've seen in the news, in the media, and kind of go back about 3 months if you can, right? Because that gives you kind of a most recent information about the organization, and then it also kind of goes back just enough that you're able to then kind of glean more information and more insight. If applicable, you also want to think about who are some of the competitors and understand who might else be in that particular landscape and in that market share. Again, who might be some collaborators that they work with, some other partnerships that they might have. And then lastly, you also want to learn about the culture if possible, right? Because that's going to be a really important element to consider as you prepare for the interview, and then also as you're meeting the individuals who will be interviewing you. So here are some resources to help you conduct your research, right? So first and foremost, go onto the organization, the company's website. You can also look on Handshake, right, which is our employer student engagement platform. You can attend info sessions if they offer them. You can also look at annual reports if it's a company that posts their annual reports. You can also just look and Google online. You can look at the vault guides that we have through Career Services as one of our resources on our website. You can look at Hoover's and some additional external platforms as well. You can also go to our online subscriptions through the Career Services library that we have available to students. That's another really helpful resource. You can also, through the Penn Library System, look at the resources through Lippincott, which is through the business school, if it's a company, it's a private company mostly focused on business. And then lastly, you can talk to people, right? So perhaps you've had some informational conversations and interviews with alumni during your application, prior to your application process, where you've been exploring different career fields, different industries. So you can certainly look on LinkedIn. QuakerNet is now called MyPen, so that's the new name for the platform. You just need your Penn key to authenticate. And then you can also look on what we call Career Shift, which is an external platform that pulls data from several companies. And so sometimes you can find information that way for the individual. So here's a brief overview in no particular order of what are the different types of interviews, right? So there's 3 main categories of interviews: behavioral, case interviews, and technical interviews. So behavioral interviews, which we will spend a little bit of time talking about today, include questions that are about you as a person, why you're a good fit for the role and opportunity. What are some examples of your past behavior in different situations? Those are the types of questions that are behaviorally based. Case interviews are used primarily for consulting firms, right? And so what it is, it's you're given a question or a particular situation scenario to help them understand how you can handle ambiguous information, so that you can ask some questions with the information that you're given for some clarity, but also how you can solve the problem, right? So there's a lot of resources for case-based interview prep that I will share with you at the end of the presentation, but this is a very distinct form of interviews, and so there is a lot of preparation involved, simply because it is different than some of the behavioral questions that you may be more familiar with. And then lastly, we have the technical interviews, and so those can be perhaps consisting of an asynchronous format, an assessment, or you might have to show your expertise and technical acumen with some of the tools and programs that you might be required to use in that particular role. We have a platform that we pay a subscription to called Exponent, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. That's going to be really helpful for you to help prepare for the technical interviews. So when you're at the interview, how can you make a positive impression, right? So first and foremost, you want to make sure that you're confident, you stay positive, you stay optimistic. You always want to give honest answers that are supported by examples. So you don't want to just be talking about generalities for those examples. You want to make sure that those answers have some concrete, tangible information. You also want to ask thoughtful questions about the position itself, the organization, maybe their services, their products. So at the end of the interview, they typically will leave a few minutes for you to ask them questions. So this is your opportunity to really show that you've done some research and you have some thoughtfully created questions for that. You also want to make sure that you're aware of when the interview is coming to a close, just so that they do give you some time to ask questions of them. You don't want to be too long-winded. And then one of the missed opportunities that I often hear about from students, and so I always like to emphasize this when we do practice mock interviews, is that you want to make sure you're always reiterating your interest and enthusiasm for this position and for this opportunity at the end of the interview, right? That's always important that you kind of end it just continuing to thank them for their time and that you continue to be interested in this role. And you can also ask them when you might be expected to hear back from them, right? So that's always, I think, a very useful fact and detail to understand, like, what is their hiring timeline look like? When do they hope to make a decision in terms of which candidate they would like to move forward with? So here's just a quick list of a few typically asked interview questions. There are many, many more that you may encounter, and we have some interviewing resources that do list a lot more questions than this, but these are certainly the ones that you will most likely encounter in a typical interview setting. So tell me about yourself, why you're interested in this position, why did you choose, how did you get interested in this particular career and industry, what is your greatest strength, and what is your motivation to put forth your greatest effort? So those are kind of like the top 5 questions that you can expect to encounter at an interview. Now, here are some more challenging interview questions that you may encounter. The first is, what is your greatest weakness, right? So thinking about not so much just a weakness, but more like what's an area of further development or growth for you? That's a better way to kind of frame it as you think about what example you'd like to give for your response. What accomplishment has given you the most satisfaction and why? So thinking about which accomplishment are you the most proud of? And then not only which one you are proud of, but why are you proud of that? How have you overcome challenges, difficulty, and how did you navigate? How did you move forward? How did you handle that situation? That's going to be an important question to think about as well. Um, Another one that you may encounter is describing a particular situation that required you to respond to pressure. How did you handle it? How did you maintain your composure? What did you do to be successful in handling that situation? What is your 5-year career path? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And then the last one may be phrased in many different ways, right? But it essentially is trying to get to the core question of asking you why, what is a time, when is a time that you failed? And can you describe that? How did you learn from that opportunity? So essentially, it's kind of thinking about a challenge, but a more kind of in-depth answer in terms of how you failed and then describing how you were able to overcome that. So now as we talk about behavioral-based questions, I think it's really important to think about, well, what is the purpose of a behavioral-based question, right? And kind of giving some context for that. So you want to understand that behavioral-based questions are based on the premise that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So that's why they ask behavioral-based questions in an interview. They want to understand how your past behavior, past experiences help shape how you will be responding, how you will be performing, how you will handle certain situations in the future. This allows you to give it many different success stories, right? It allows you to share those particular areas of strength, particular areas of success. And so behavioral-based questions, I think, are really positive, right? We do recommend that you answer them using what we call the STAR method, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, because the STAR method helps kind of frame the answer in a logical way, in a way that the interviewer is able to follow your responses and understand the context and framework. So how do you identify and recognize the behavioral-based questions? So there's many different ways that they may be phrased, but typically they might begin with, tell us a time when, describe an experience in which this happened. Can you give an example of a time when, walk me through the steps that you've taken when you've done X, Y, or Z, right? So those are very typical beginning words that serve as the basis for the behavioral based question that will be asked of you. Now, the STAR method is simply an acronym referring to situation, task, action, results. So the situation is thinking of a particular situation or scenario in which you were involved in that had a positive outcome. The task is describing the tasks involved in that situation. So what were the action items and the tasks that you had to do as part of that situation? The action is being more specific, right? So describing it in more of a specific nature, what actions you took in order to complete those tasks and achieve the results. And then lastly, the results, which are positive, right? So what positive results followed due to your actions? So again, thinking about, why are employers using these types of questions? It's because they want to objectively evaluate the candidates, right? And they need something to be able to compare one candidate to another. And that is because people are coming from different backgrounds, different skill sets. And so this evaluation of specific skills is how it's connected to the role that you're applying, right? So how are those specific skills that are needed for the role able to be evaluated? And so behavioral based questions are one way to achieve that. It also allows you more insight into the realities of the job, right? So thinking about, you've read the job posting, perhaps you've, heard a little bit more about the role, but some of these questions will enable you to get more insight and more information as well about what those functions may be. And lastly, again, it's an accurate predictor of future performance based on past performance in similar situations. So how do you think of these answers and what should these answers include, right? So first and foremost, providing verifiable, concrete evidence as to how you've dealt with some of these issues and situations in the past. Um, you want to make sure that you're providing specific examples, not just generalizations. And so by using the STAR method, that really helps kind of frame the example with some specific details. And then you also want to think about what are the skills and experiences that are relevant to this particular position. So as you think about how to create the STAR stories, right, you want to be able to brainstorm different experiences that you've had, which demonstrate many of the skills that are needed for the different jobs that you are applying for, right? So there's a lot of similarities in terms of what are some of the core skill sets required for different positions. So that would include teamwork, collaboration, taking initiative, planning, leadership, commitment, problem solving skills. So those are all experiences that you can draw upon in your background as a student or postdoc that help demonstrate these particular areas. You want to make sure that these STAR stories are as relevant to the position as possible, right? So that's also really important to keep in mind, that it's not necessarily going to be the same example that you give in response to each question and also each position. So each interview you do need to prepare for, because chances are the positions are not identical and there's going to be some different areas that you want to highlight and mention. You also want to make sure that some of the examples that you do think about and that you have prepared are when the results may have been different than what was expected, right? Because that's important to show how did you handle this? How did you navigate this? I often get asked by students during our mock interviews, well, how much should I be practicing these stories, right? And the answer is, to the point that you feel comfortable, right? But it's not going to be memorization, because memorization will come off in your answer as too rehearsed and too robotic. So you do want to make sure that you can practice your stories, have your key data points that you want to talk about, but please do not feel like you need to memorize the sentences, because it just does not come through as natural. And it's really just a very difficult way to for the interviewer to understand how you're able to think, about these different scenarios. They don't want to know that it's been memorized. So again, please do not feel like you need to memorize them, because that's just not a great strategy. You also want to be specific in these examples that you do think about, right? So what are some of the things that you did do and how did you learn that? But it may not necessarily be what you might do in a future situation, right? So there is sometimes a distinction to keep in mind that they want to learn what you did do, but that it's not necessarily what you might do in a future situation. You also want to be able to quantify when possible in your example some of the details, right? Because that just helps them get a better sense of the scale or the scope of that particular project or scenario and situation. And then lastly, emphasizing the honesty. Make sure that you're always honest and you have the integrity. So after the interview, you want to send a thank you email within 24 hours. Why do we say within 24 hours? Because perhaps you were their last candidate they brought in, and they may start deliberating right after your interview. So you do want to send it within 24 hours while the memories are fresh in your mind as well as their minds. You want to re-express your interest in the thank you email, in the position, and why you're continuing to be interested in this role. So in other words, what did you learn in that interview setting that made you even more interested in this job? That's a really great element to include in that thank you email. Okay, so we're now going to talk about our Exponent platform, which is a great platform for preparing for technical interviews. It's a learning platform that you have access to as a Penn student and postdoc for free. We have it available on our website, and it enables you to prepare for the technical interviews. There are many tips, videos, classes, guides from different big tech employees. And the best part is it's accessible 24/7. So it really is a great resource to check out for the technical interviews. So the way that you can access it is you go to our careerservices.upenn.edu website. You type in Exponent in the search field, and this is what will come up. So it does give a brief overview of some of the other areas that it covers that you'll see listed here. And then when you click on the very bottom, you'll see the red arrow. It'll say View Resource. That is where you then will be able to log on. Once you're in Exponent, you'll see this is your dashboard. So you'll see over here, I've highlighted specifically the courses section. So this is where you're able to learn about different topics as it relates to technical interviews. This one in particular, I just happened to take a screenshot of for data science interview prep. There are 8 courses on this particular topic. So what's really great is that it's not typically just 1 or 2. There are many different modules that you can take a look at with these courses. Here are some of the other areas that they offer. So in addition to data science, they have product management, software engineering, data engineering, engineering management, system design, machine learning, data analytics. And there's some even additional categories that you can click on for where you see view all courses. So there's a lot of information available on here. This is just an example of some of the course libraries that they have for specific categories. So I just happened to take a screenshot of the all, but there were so many that this is just the beginning part of that image. But as you can see, there are specific categories as you go horizontal at the top if you'd like to narrow it down. One of the other features of Exponent that I think is really useful is that you can have practice mock interviews, not only with peers, but you can also practice with AI. So that's a really great feature that I hope that if you want to have a mock interview from a technical standpoint, you can take advantage of that through the Exponent platform. And then if you'd like to learn more about the Exponent platform, there will be a session on November 20th at 8 p.m. with one of the coaches from Exponent, and you can register for that on Handshake for the event. So if you are preparing for technical interviews, you want to learn more about Exponent as a tool to help you prepare for that, feel free to check out the event. Now, one of the other interview platforms that we have a subscription to is called Big Interview. This is typically more in the case of behavioral-based interviews. So Exponent is for the technical, Big Interview is more for behavioral-based. And it's a really great learning and practice tool for students and postdocs because you can select not only the type of interview and the industry and the difficulty level that you want, but it's very interactive, right? So you can, once you've recorded your responses, you can share it with a friend, you can share it with one of us in career services. So, we're able to give you some feedback. And again, it's very customizable. So you can select the type of interview that you may be preparing for. the different career field, and the level of difficulty. And then here are some additional resources that you have on interviewing. We have a YouTube Career Services channel um, where we have curated a list of interviewing workshops and presentations. So feel free to check that out. It's a very helpful, if you'd like to learn more about interviewing and have it be more kind of in the presentation format, this is a great playlist for you to check out. We also have a written guide for graduate students and postdocs. We updated it this summer. It's a wonderful guide, has a lot of information. You'll find possible questions that you may encounter in the interview, ways to prepare. It goes into some real depth and some specific details that can be helpful. It also has some potential questions that you might want to ask the interviewer as well. We also have some additional interview resources. So that third bullet point listed here, the complete interview resources, if you click on that, it will send you to our interviewing landing page on our website. We also have the case interview prep tool as well. And then lastly, feel free to schedule an appointment with us in Career Services. We're here to help. Not only can we do a mock practice interview, but we can also do some interview prep with you as well.